Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Alleluia. I'm really pleased to be with you in this recording for your Easter Sunday worship. And on behalf of the Baptist Union, of which I am the president for a few more weeks, I bring warm greetings. I enjoy films very much, but I'm a bit selective. Generally, I like films with a happy ending or with a satisfying sense of closure. And actually, I'm quite fond of rom-coms. I can cope with sad films, but if I'm going to have my heart ripped out, I need to have some indication of this beforehand. And if it's one of those films that seems to be moving towards a happy ending and then ends in tragedy, I find it quite distressing. I guess that what I'm saying would be the experience of a number of us. Some of us like a good weepy and we feel better after, but actually many of us find it very gratifying when they all live happily ever after. Let me say, the Easter story is not a happy ending story. On the contrary, it's a story with a shocking new beginning. And we sense something of this in the reading from Mark's Gospel. Mark's Gospel has been described as a passion story with extended introduction. In other words, the majority of Mark's Gospel, written in this punchy, almost tabloid style, is directed to the death of Jesus. In the light of this, you'd expect Mark to have written far more about the resurrection. For whatever reason, we don't have it. There's an abruptness. The story comes to a sudden halt. In his account, there isn't even an appearance of the risen Jesus. There's the promise of one. But in Mark's Gospel, it doesn't happen. Mark appears to end with the words, "Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid." That's hardly a great climax to the story. And certainly it doesn't read like a typical happy ending. Let's go back to the beginning of this episode. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so they might go to anoint Jesus' body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. There's something very matter-of-fact about this account. All three women were witnesses of Jesus' death on the cross. They saw him die, and two of them knew where he was buried. They were going to attend to the business of anointing his body. This was a sad task, but a necessary one, partly out of reverence for the body, but also to lessen the smell of decomposition, because in due course, other bodies would be buried in the same tomb. Their business was the stuff of death. And the thing that was preoccupying them was the stone. Who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? This was no small thing, and at this stage, they didn't know how they would do it. Clearly, the last thing in their mind was that the stone would already be rolled away. There was absolutely no expectation that this would be the case. But it was. And it came as a total surprise. And the way that it's written, it's made clear that this wasn't something that a human being had done. This was God's work. So it's not unreasonable to say that they were shocked to the core. We might say they were totally blown away. But then there's more. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. "Don't be alarmed," he said. "You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." Now, I want you to notice their reaction. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. They are not overjoyed. They are not ecstatic. They are fearful and perplexed. We read that they fled. There was an urgency about their leaving. They said nothing, dumbstruck. I imagine them heads down, ignoring anyone whom they met, all because of their fear. The words of the angel bringing together the crucifixion and resurrection. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. It would bring reassurance in time. But at this point, it freaks out the women even more. It's been said that even today, a dead Christ is easier to come to terms with than a living Lord. Stability rather than surprise is still the preferred option of many, especially in a time of crisis. The fact is that at this stage, these women, these first witnesses of the resurrection, did not expect a miracle. They did not expect God to be at work, and words failed them. We know from the other accounts that their silence wasn't for long, but at this point, they were stunned by what they were told. Let me say again, Easter is not a story with a happy ending. It's a story with a shocking new beginning. I want us to think about this new beginning a bit more with three things to ponder. The first is this: Easter is a new beginning for the cosmos. The death of Jesus on the cross speaks to us in a number of different ways, but only in the light of his resurrection from the dead. Without the resurrection, Jesus was just another messianic pretender. If you were a Messiah who ended up on a cross, you were not a Messiah. Without the resurrection, his words, which spoke of a new order to come, were just an idealistic dream. Amazing words, inspiring words, moving words, but at the last, empty words. But if Jesus the Nazarene, who was crucified, is risen, then Jesus really was God's Messiah. And in his death, the new order, the kingdom of which he spoke, really had come about. What the resurrection tells us is that this is the birth of a new creation. The power that has tyrannized the old creation has been broken, defeated, overthrown. God's kingdom is now launched in power and glory on earth as in heaven. It hasn't come in its fullness, that's obvious to us, but it has begun. The resurrection of Jesus doesn't simply mean it's all right, we're going to heaven now. No, the resurrection means that the life of heaven has been born on this earth. The resurrection of Jesus doesn't mean so there is a life after death. There is. But Easter says much more than that. It speaks of that life as something that will be neither ghostly nor unreal, but solid and definite and practical. The Easter story at the end of Mark's Gospel and at the end of the other Gospels is not about an end, it's about a beginning. The beginning of God's new world, the beginning of the kingdom. God is now in charge on earth as in heaven. And God's being in charge is focused on Jesus himself being King and Lord. The resurrection proves it, it validates it. Easter is a new beginning for the cosmos. And the second thing to ponder is that Easter is a new beginning, especially for people who have messed up. The angel announces, he has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter. You will remember how Jesus had said to his disciples, you will all fall away. And Peter had replied, even if all fall away, I will not. Jesus answered him, "Today, tonight, before the cock crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times." And just as Jesus said, it happened. One of the most tragic moments in the whole Passion story is at that point when we read of Peter recalling Jesus' words to him. And he broke down and wept. Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends, had let him down badly. He had boasted, he'd blustered, and he'd fallen down flat on his face. But strangely, paradoxically, it's the thing that actually enabled Peter to go on to become the famous leader of the church. Deep in the heart of the Christian story is a suspicion of Christians who believe that they have earned their faith rather than receive the free forgiveness of Jesus. Everyone knows that Peter messed up. There is no shame in failure. The only shame is not being prepared to accept forgiveness. That was Judas's shame. There is nothing that you have done that Jesus will not forgive if you're prepared to accept his forgiveness. You may have to live with the consequences, but Jesus offers a new start. And for those of us who have been followers of Jesus for many years, there will have been many occasions when we've failed him. Like Peter, we have professed our love and devotion and then gone on to let him down. The message of the angel, "Go tell his disciples," and Peter, speaks to us of new beginnings. William Barclay, a writer of very accessible commentaries on the New Testament, admittedly from a previous age, but still excellent resources. He said these words, he said, "The most precious thing about Jesus is the way he treats us on the field of our defeat." This is what we call grace, which identifies Peter, the disciple who denied Jesus, as one of the first who should know that Jesus was alive. Easter is a new beginning for the cosmos. Easter is a new beginning, especially for people who have messed up. And the third thing to ponder is that Easter is a new beginning for you and me today. The message of the angel goes on to say, "He is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you." This was the experience of the first Christians, and it's ours too. The risen Jesus goes ahead of us, and as his people, we are to follow him. The early Christians were known as the Way, and of course, they followed the One, as we do, who described himself as the way, the truth, and the life. It's not down to us to forge a path, but to follow in his way. The angel is very specific and says, "He is going ahead of you into Galilee." Clearly, Galilee was a location, but for the disciples, it was also the place from which they came. It was home, the place they lived and worked, the place of everyday. And it was in the everyday that they would encounter him. And for us, we are to encounter Jesus and follow him, not just in our worship and on a Sunday or when we come together as God's people, but in the everyday routine of our lives, in the ordinary circumstances where we find ourselves today, tomorrow, Tuesday. Easter is a new beginning for you and me today. We are living in very challenging times as COVID continues to affect us. as Russia continues its invasion of Ukraine and all the consequences of this, not only for that region, but for the whole world. As escalating fuel prices and the rise in the cost of living create nothing short of a social emergency for many families. Easter isn't a happy ending. It doesn't magic away all our problems. For the first Christians, it didn't mean that life would be a bed of roses. And in fact, life was about to become even more uncomfortable, resulting in persecution and even martyrdom for many of the followers of Jesus. Easter isn't a happy ending, but Easter is a new beginning. It's a new beginning for the cosmos. Jesus, who was dead, is alive forevermore, and death no longer has the final word. It's a new beginning, especially for people who have messed up. Nothing is unforgivable. It's a new beginning for you and me today. Jesus goes ahead of us, and we're to follow in his way in the everyday circumstances of our lives. Amen.